the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
And hello, welcome to the HBR Talk 286 show, I think it is, and Feminism, 200 Years of Failure. So I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks, and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson. And tonight, once again, we're wading back into a flood of feminist baloney. Hope you guys got your hip waders, because this is bad. But before we get into that, and I'm sorry that I'm going to be clearing my throat and sniffling at you. Lauren is too, because we're wimps. We have allergies. Nerds. My sound is bad. Alright, let me see if my mic is turned down. What the heck is going on there? Alright, can you hear me alright now? Let's hopefully...
Yes.
Let's see if they can... I'm hearing from one commenter so far that my sound is coming through quiet. And not hearing from anybody else on it, so... Okay, everybody that... Amat Sushi says yes. Okay, good. Alright, so, as always, we gotta do what we gotta do. Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly, instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. Heck, we can't even count on the Constitution of the United States.
And when we say thought police, we do indeed, by confirmation, mean the Department of Homeland Security.
Yes. Yes, we now understand that Uncle Sam has some social insecurities. Nerd! Just like the rest of us. But yeah, so, we will start Karen's show on Karen's channel without Karen. as they hired a humdinger of an organization to do their research for them, obviously. Poor Karen is totally being blamed for everything that we say and do. But yeah. So we're on a list again. Now, how many does that make it?
12.
Jeez, Pete. Yeah. Well, that's appropriate. It is Christmas coming up. 12 is a good number. So there we go. I hope you guys are having a good December. And for those who are from the United States, today was Pearl Harbor Day, and I'm sure I have been unable to be online very much, but I'm sure a lot of people were discussing it just like every year and remembering the attack on Pearl Harbor clear back in the day. And like that was a civilian attack. That were not a civilian attack, but an attack on civilians and as well as military. And I think it was a big shocker simply because in that attack, I mean, we lost a lot of men and women. And usually in wartime, the fatalities are almost exclusively men. And that shocked the people of the United States back then. And of course, we've had the argument on social media about war casualties and soldiers and voting rights and so on. But that was one that I don't think the American public will ever. I don't think the American public will ever get over that, because I think that was our first real experience with it coming to our doorstep. And of course, what ended up happening as a result was men all over the country signed up, women signed up to become nurses and operate in the military and other capacities. And then the people supported a draft. And of course, that resulted in the United States tipping the scales very, very hard again in World War II, but at the cost of a huge number of mostly men, also some women. It's true, but mostly men, and only men were drafted. And we've had people will probably bring up the attacks that led to the United States getting involved in World War I, but it's not the same. An attack on a ship isn't the same as an attack on a whole civilian area. And so, but in any case, it's not the show.
And of course, it's nothing compared with January the 6th. And I look forward to the Hollywood movie about that, and just how much they missed the point about that as well.
Yeah. That just blows my mind. That they got away with saying that kind of stuff. Like, we had thousands of deaths, and January 6th, we had that none of the deaths were really connected, except for the Patriot, that was shot during the protest. None of the deaths that they attributed to the protest were actually because of the protest. So none of the protesters killed people. Only the cops. And certainly nobody killed 3,000 or more people. So 3,000 wasn't Pearl Harbor. 3,000 was 9/11. Which I'm not going to get into that because I have thoughts, and we're already we already are apparently on a list. So that should tell you what I think of 9/11, what I think of what happened at 9/11, and how angry I am about what I think happened. So there you go.
I for one, think the U.S. government is wonderful. I think the FBI, and the CIA are wonderful, and I would like to visit this country as many times as I can.
And there we go.
That is all.
Yep. Well, now you have to travel to Ohio with our fresh country air, or something like that. Oh, this is I grew up in a country that's so different than where I live now, and I haven't moved out of the state. It's so sad. Let's get into Michael Flood. So let me make sure I've got this where I can actually see it and not halfway behind my OBS window.
Do we have to get into Michael Flood? I was enjoying that.
I mean, can we do it with like a pitchfork?
Yes. We're actually going to. I mean, what else do you use to bale straw? You gotta have a pitchfork. I mean, we could say bullshit, and then we need a shovel. But honestly, most of this is just straw. So let's get into women's control of personal wealth as Michael Flood sees it. This should be interesting. So he says, fact. And again, I noticed that there is not a citation at the end of this paragraph. And he doesn't actually say what the... Okay, we're going to go to the MRA claim is the next paragraph. Fact, it is unlikely that women control the majority of personal wealth or even half of personal wealth in the USA, given that 1. Men in general are far more likely than women to be in full-time paid work, with far more women in part-time work. He's never met me. 2, top-paying positions in most professions are dominated by men. And 3, men in general receive higher wages than women, in part because of occupational segregation. So we already have a set of claims by Flood that don't really have anything to do with whether or not women have control over personal wealth. He's talking about whether or not women earn the majority of personal wealth. Just want to point that out. So the MRA claim he is citing is that women control 51% of personal wealth in the USA. This claim is false. It is based on a prediction made in a 2005 book about the likely future patterns of personal wealth. It is not based on data about women's and men's actual personal wealth. Many sources cite a report by the BMO Women's Institute titled Financial Concerns for Women, released in 2015. This report is here, and it gives the claim on page 2, citing the Family Wealth Advisors Council report, Women of Wealth, 2012. This report is here. And he has 2 links here. It gives the claim on page 5, citing a 2005 book by Farrah Warner, Power of the Purse, How Smart Businesses Are Adapting to the World's Most Important Consumers, Women. And the book merely predicts women's future control of personal wealth. So I'm going to address two or three things here. I'm sure you guys probably already have a bunch to say about it as well. So we've gone through his claims, his description of our claim, and his initial claims as to why it's false. And the first thing is, if we go back to the first paragraph, men in general being far more likely than women to be in full-time paid work. So let's talk about that for a minute. Right? Men who go into full-time paid work do so because they are the breadwinner of the household in which they live, normally. Whether they are single or married, men have to support the financial interests of their household. It doesn't change for them because a woman has moved into their house, whether or not they have to be the breadwinner in most cases. What does change for them is how much it costs to be the breadwinner. So a guy that lives by himself, doesn't have a wife to take care of, doesn't have children to support, doesn't have a household to support, can get by on a much lower income. He doesn't need to spend money on the accoutrements of attempting to impress women. He's not spending $300 a month on her makeup that she uses to impress everybody but him, because he's going to see her in the morning without it. He's not paying for a larger place to live. He's not trying to live the picket fence American dream. He doesn't have to have a either a fancy car or a family car. And he can get by with a little compact, cheapo, equivalent to the kind of car that I used to drive a Ford. It wasn't mine, but I used to drive a Ford Festiva back in the 90s. I had to stash my legs in the trunk, but you can get by on stuff like that when you're single. You don't have to have tens of thousands of dollars to spend on this vehicle and that domicile and this many extra clothes. You don't buy school supplies every year. You're paying for groceries for one. Your entertainment is much easier to afford. If you want to go see a movie, you're not paying for 4 or 5 tickets, you're paying for 1 ticket. You can go at the drop of the hat. And the other thing is, you're not having to arrange any of your work schedule around, well, we're going to go see the in-laws. Well, it's the week of the kids' Christmas play at school, or, anything like that. So they're able to earn more at a lower level job than they would normally earn at a lower level job, because they can be the guy that works on Christmas morning. They're not going to be watching their kids open their presents. So that's one thing. Yes, guys do earn, more money because they are more likely to be in full-time work. And the reason women are not as likely to be in full-time work is because women have a choice, especially if they get married. There's financial aid that you get if you have kids out of wedlock, or if you are divorced. But if those aren't the situation, you also have, women use sugar daddies. Women do things like signing up for dating websites and using dates to get free meals and then ghosting them and get away with it. If women are trying to find a partner, they're not the ones that have to pay for dates. They're the ones that get treated, right? So even single women they don't have the expenses that men have in regard to this. And you don't have to do the things that women do that elevate women's expenses. Like, I don't spend $300 a month on makeup. I'm allergic to makeup, so it saves me a lot of money.
Women have a societal safety net when it comes to things like that, right?
Yep.
Because there's always going to be someone around who feels emotionally invested in her situation enough to come up out of their pockets and say, "Hey, what you need? What can I get? You need some, you know what I mean?"
You don't even
Men
have to
don't
be.
have that.
Yeah, you don't even have to be remarkable. I'm like Miss Plain Jane, no frills, cargo pants wearing, loudmouth bitch, and I've had to explain to men that I don't want a sugar daddy, and I won't accept one. Like, even me. I don't know. It's
You
just
know?
any
And
woman.
the thing about sugar babies and sugar daddies is that, I think it's seen as, or kind of glorified, because obviously these women are getting all of these things paid for. They're getting trips and having things bought for them. Oh my God, every girl would want that, right? But there's a give and take, and they don't talk about the other side of that. Well, maybe he's not as attractive as she would like, and it's just
Yeah. Or she's just not interested in him except for the money. Like
yeah.
that's the bottom line. It's a transactional relationship, and it's, I think, very harmful to men.
Absolutely. We just watched a video where there was this 20, I think she was like late 20s, and the guy she was dating was in his 60s, and she flat out said, "Well, I only wanted him for his money at first." She said it right in front of him, just so nonchalantly, as if
Yeah.
like, yeah, what? But now I really love him. No, we really have a bond forming. And the entire time you're looking at her face and just the disdain that she has for that guy. She's not happy. She might be happy getting money to spend on whatever the hell it is that she likes, but
Yeah.
she, that's what it is. It's a transaction.
It really is.
You
And
know?
it's kind of heartbreaking in both at both ends, because the materialism that fosters in women is also self-destructive. When your focus is on things and plastic surgery and makeup and hair and how people are looking at you, and not like what really cool things you talk about with the person that you're spending your time with,
Mhm.
and how much you enjoy their company, and hoping they enjoy yours, and you having values in common and stuff like that. It takes away from life. It takes away from your fulfillment in life. So it's damaging to women too. I think it's much
Right.
more damaging to men, because the denial of a real relationship and an opportunity for a real relationship, like men in that situation get programmed to just tolerate being exploited, and it is exploitation.
Absolutely.
And then on top of that, the hit to the self-esteem, to believe that one has to pay for companionship, it's not fair to men, right? But that's a big part of it. And then you also have, in terms of women's control of personal wealth, you also have when men and women are married, when they do form a household together, or when they just live together, and he's working full time and she's working part time, his paycheck isn't entirely under his control. The source that Flood was talking about, the book by Farrah Warner, was about the fact the statement in that book was about the fact that the grocery shopper at most houses is women. So she decides what brand of ketchup he eats on his cheeseburger, what brand of beef is in that cheeseburger, what brand of buns that cheeseburger is in, or whether or not he gets buns, or you're eating your burger in
Sliced bread
lettuce,
or
or
yeah.
yeah, we're going on the Atkins diet. Okay, yes, dear. Like that's one way that women control a significant amount of personal wealth. Um, maybe
I mean,
he's a Ford guy, and she wants a particularly popular foreign car because it's got a reputation as a better family car. Maybe he would like a big truck. And she's like, well, no, we need a compact car because I'm an environmentalist. Guess which vehicle they're going to get?
exactly. So, are you familiar with the term grocery getter? Speaking of
Grocery
cars,
getter?
yes.
No.
So it's a term that was used for, and I'm thinking this was probably popular around the 50s, maybe 40s, 50s, 60s era when, you had the one car that
Mm.
the whole family used, but then you had the nice one car that you only went out to get groceries in, like
Oh,
that
yeah.
the wife used to go out and get her groceries in. That's the grocery getter car.
Yeah, that's the car that had the trunk space. Or,
Uh-huh.
like, we had a station wagon when I was a kid. My first speeding ticket was for getting a 1981 Dodge Diplomat station wagon to go 96 miles an hour after it was 10 years old. They were not made to drive that fast. Damn thing was shaking. It was really not good. Yeah, so actually my second speeding ticket was in that car too, and I got that one on purpose, but that's a story for another day. And no, I was not trying to get a date. I was trying to find a local cop because we didn't have cell phones at that time. I found him, and
Or did he find you?
no, I went through 3 known speed traps going over the speed limit just enough that they usually would pull you over before I found one. There was a problem, and I didn't know where there was a phone I could get to nearby, so I think the speeding ticket was, it's like, back then it wasn't that expensive. It was like $60.
Yeah.
Which I guess back then was expensive, but I spent that much money to get direct access to an officer to report a problem because it was an emergency in my book. And yeah, it's what happened for me hanging out with people I should have been hanging out with. But yeah, today I just would have gotten on my mobile phone and dialed 911, and problem would have been solved, right? But that's the way things were back in the day. And I also didn't know where the police station was in that community, and you couldn't just get on Google Maps either, so, and you couldn't just go to a gas station either because it was after they rolled up the sidewalks in that community, so there was no place to, like, there was no business to go visit. Things were different in the 80s. Yeah. But anyway, it was even today, it's abnormal, but back then it was really abnormal for me to have the level of work I did and the level of disposable income I had. And something I've noticed all my life, other women will get mad at women who spend their money on men.
Yep.
Even now, when other women on social media that I'm arguing gender issues with find out that in my home we are co-breadwinners. We both work and we both pay into the living expenses, and our incomes are pretty close. Sometimes he makes more money, sometimes I make more money. But in the meantime, we just tag team stuff. This is coming up. It's got to be paid. Which account are we paying it out of? How much do we need to have in that account? That kind of thing. And just flip money back and forth to make sure that everything is covered. But when you talk to feminists about that, they think I'm being exploited. But I thought feminism was supposed to be about female independence.
Right.
Right? If something happened to my husband, financially speaking, I would not be devastated. Emotionally, I'd be like, I'd just die inside. That would be the end of who I am. But financially speaking, I'd be okay. And if something happened to me, got enough life insurance on me that he'd be covered. So that doesn't mean murder me, though, guys. Just for any hate listeners out there, I got stuff to do. But yeah, so it's things are different, but it's unusual, and it's resented by a lot of other women. So the next thing he says is top paying positions in most professions are dominated by men. And this is one that drives me nuts, right? What he's talking about are positions of responsibility. And it's not that they're dominated by men. It's that men do what it takes to be trusted in those positions. And more men do that. Far more men do that than women. Right? The reason is the accountability gap. If you can't criticize what somebody does, if you can't say somebody is doing a bad job and they need to improve what they're doing, if you cannot say that somebody is not looking the part and they need to look more professional or be more aggressive in portraying the position that they are in, because of their gender, then that's a detriment to them getting that job. If it's always somebody else's fault when things go wrong, that's a detriment to someone getting, say, a position as of leadership in a company, or doing a job that everybody relies on, right? You're not going to hire somebody who doesn't have to be mindful of the impact of their decision making on the people around them, and who isn't going to be mindful of their own safety, and then will turn around and become a casualty or cost the company a lot of money because of injuries and stuff like that, or get somebody else injured, cause damage, cause a power outage, cause all kinds of other problems. You have to have people who are reliable. But feminism, instead of increasing women's reliability and increasing women's accountability, has gone the other direction. Well, if women are not going to be accountable, if women are not going to, the buck's not going to stop with her, women are not going to take responsibility for their decisions and the impact of their decisions, and even taking responsibility for their decision to assign work to somebody who is going to fail them, right? So a CEO, for instance, has to take responsibility for what the people under him do. And I say him because women will just blame the people under them. Those people will get fired, and then she walks away clean as a whistle. Then, of course, you're going to see fewer women taking all of the steps that it takes to climb the corporate ladder or to start a business and achieve success in that business. Like, women's businesses will fail more because of that. So if feminists want more women in top paying positions, they need to close that accountability gap. And it has to be by elevating female accountability, not by reducing male accountability. And that the wage gap myth tells us that right now that accountability gap is pretty stable. If women are going to complain that they are victims of their own life choices and career choices, their work-life balance, their right to have choices that men don't have in family situations, then they haven't anywhere near closed that accountability gap. They're maintaining it. And of course, that covers the statement about men receiving higher wages as well. It's not about occupational segregation. It's about what men and women actually do to benefit their employers and how employers compensate that. So, regarding the MRA claim, yeah, this is the first one that's not a straw man. And he still fucked it up. So, here he is claiming this claim is bogus because it's from a 2005 book that predicts women's future control of personal wealth. But he doesn't explain what it's based on, what that prediction is based on. That prediction is based on the fact that most household shopping is controlled by women, and most financial decisions in a household, most of the big financial decisions in a household are made with the wife's benefit in mind. Like, in my case, I took out a lot of life insurance because if something happens to me, and there's a lot of our any debt we have is more in my husband's name than in my name. So if something happens to him and I can't pay that, I'm not saddled with it by law. But if something happens to me and he can't pay that because he loses my income, he's still saddled with it. So my life insurance is higher. I think a lot of husbands have to do that because a lot of household debt is stuff like a mortgage on a house, and if it's not paid, she loses the house. We live in an apartment. We don't have to deal with that, right? But and there's also a lot of women have a lot of credit card debt in their name. Like a lot of ours is not credit card related. It's other things. A lot of it's medical and stuff like that, and educational. So it's a different situation. But a lot of men have to. They're the ones that their income pays for, say, medical insurance that is used more by the wife. Their income, and then if they've got kids, it's usually the wife that decides if the kids need to go to the doctor, right? It's the wife that decides, like I said, what kind of car the household needs. It's the wife that decides what kind of neighborhood they want to live in, and what kind of domicile they want to live in. Whether it's okay to live in an apartment or trailer, or whether they absolutely have to have a house. So yeah, it's not really honest to say that the book merely predicting women's future control of personal wealth is debunks the claim. But that's what he says. So, thus the claim that women control 50% of personal, or 51% of the personal wealth in the USA is bogus. It has no basis in actual data. Men are just as likely to splurge as women, and they spend money on average when they treat themselves. More money on average when they treat themselves. A survey by, I think that's pronounced Deloitte Insights, among consumers in 23 companies and based on a database of about 100,000 splurge purchases, found that men splurge as often as women do. And when they do, they spend almost 40% more on their purchases. In fact, globally significant proportions of women do not have any control over decisions over their own income. In many countries, particularly sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, a large fraction of women are not involved in household decisions about spending their personal earned income. So here is where this straw man is. Because the MRA claim isn't about those countries. It's about countries in the West, Western women. None of us ever say that women in sub-Saharan Africa have that control. And this is something that feminists do all the time, right? You say, this condition exists in the United States, and it affects men this way and women this way. And they say, well, in sub-Saharan Africa, right? But what part of the United States is that? Because I thought that was a totally different set of countries on a totally different continent. But it's maybe your maps are different from mine. Is that around like maybe Texas, somewhere in Death Valley, or the Deep South, or is it out west? Like, where is it on your map?
I can't quite tell where the Mott is and where the Bailey is.
Yeah,
like they're all about bringing down the patriarchy, and then we point out, well, the patriarchy, as you describe it, does appear to exist in relation to that Cedar map you have, where it's mostly a problem in Africa and the Middle East and Asia and whatnot. And I guess that's unconnected with the way the government that you support and that supports you It's all about invading those countries and bombing them and stealing all their resources, like they have for so often, and like you claim you don't like. Whereas you're all about sorting out this patriarchy problem, but only in the countries listed in light on the CEDAW map. Only in the countries where it is the least problem. And it all comes down to something that's oddly right wing in women. Women are only interested in their own kind, in their own men. They're only interested in controlling their own men, which it's kind of neither right wing nor left wing, because I mean, oikophobia is quite specifically an extreme form of leftism, and that's what leads people to I don't want to say oppress their own men, because that's obviously not a thing, but to control their own men, governmentally speaking. So there's this divide, there's this hypocrisy, and I know it's pointless pointing out hypocrisy for the sake of perhaps getting through to the hypocrites. But yeah, if patriarchy was a problem, you would be focusing on the countries that exhibit it as you describe it. But you don't, and when I say you, I mean feminists.
Yeah, that's
you focus specifically on the countries in which men have the least power, the fewest rights, which suggests that you're really not trying to rebalance any imbalance. You're really just trying to push on any open door you can find, which is we control whatever men we are allowed to control, and the men we're allowed to control are our own men, and that's what it comes down to. That's why women of the West aren't interested in controlling Muslim men or Chinese men or anything else, because they don't own those men.
No,
they own the European men, they own the American men, and that's what they're concerned with. These men are our property. Those men can do whatever they like. In fact, we'll bring those men over to do whatever they like, because white men aren't fucking us quite like we like. They keep singing songs about how all this stuff they're not going to do to us. Oh, Delilah. They don't like that. They want men who go, I'm gonna fuck you, bitch. That's what they're importing, because they've cucked their own men.
They'll also use those men against their own men.
And they're going to complain that those cucked men are the misogynists. And they're going to make believe that these exotic men are the ones who respect women in some way. I've lost track of just how mental this has all gone now.
And the really sad thing is they'll demand respect, and they'll talk a lot about respect, but they don't understand respect. They don't know what it is. They don't know how it's obtained. They don't know how to engage in it, right? They don't know how to give respect. And they don't know how to get respect or why they don't get respect. But they think they deserve it, and they get very upset if they think they're not getting it. So this is why feminists are so angry. But yeah, they do have this thing about pointing at those men over there, that patriarchy over there, and then saying, this is the condition over there, and we have to reform it here in our country where it's not happening. Over and over again. They did the same thing with sexual violence and India. And as it turns out, there's quite a bit of false allegation going on in India. They've got, at a minimum, a 65% rate of false allegation. That's the low end. It may be, and is likely to be, as high as 85% of allegations being false. So it's a particularly dangerous place to be a man around women. But they play it off like it's, women are just getting raped at random in the street. You're just walking down the street, and all of a sudden, 16 guys run a train on you, and then you're dead, or you go about your day injured. But that's not the environment most women live in there. And a lot of video is coming out of India of abusive women who will attack random men in the street who are angry about this or that, and they hit them with their slippers. I guess that's a big thing, like beating people with your slipper. If you're female, you take your slipper off and you like start smacking people with it. They wouldn't like that if I did that with my shoes, because a lot of times, especially if it's cold outside, I wear boots, so I'm not hitting anybody with anything. But yeah, and they'll attack men who are in the service industry in particular, like taxi drivers. Oh, you want me to pay the fee? No, I'm going to hit you a bunch of times with my shoe. Oh, you're filming? I'm going to hit the person with the camera. And it's crazy, right? But no, what do we hear about? We hear that there's an epidemic of gang rape in this country. And America has to reform our rape laws to take away men's due process rights because of India's false epidemic of gang rape. And when you ask for evidence of the epidemic, they will point you to one case. Like not an epidemic of cases, but one case, which was a terrible case. But it's still one case, right? The amount of bad involved in one case doesn't make it more than one case. It means it was a terrible tragedy, and there was something really wrong with the participants, the perpetrators, right, and the people that didn't step in, the bystanders that didn't step in. But one case is not an epidemic, and it's different how you address one case. So there you go. But 11 is a little much. I'm a size 10.
One case is not systemic.
No.
And institutional, as they like to say.
And there was quite a bit of outrage over that occurrence in India. Right? That wasn't something that people in India were like, "Oh, this just happened. It's not a big deal." Everybody was angry.
It's whenever you can only point to one case. It's that case is a case where the male perpetrator in question had the book thrown at him. In other words, he had the system, the institutional system, thrown at him, which you can't say about as you were saying, the God knows how many cases of women just getting out of their general responsibilities by assaulting people and crying assault in the process.
Yep.
So it's when women abuse people, they don't abuse people using themselves. They abuse the system, and this is why it's so invisible to people, because it's not seen as female abuse. It's women using the system that is put in place to help them abuse people.
Well, and then you
and
also
go ahead and use that system to abuse people, and that's not counted, even statistically, as female on male abuse. Yeah. It's not even counted as abuse at all by the system, because it's just an abuse of the system. So the system's going to say, well, we investigated ourselves and we found we did nothing wrong.
Yeah. You also have the issue of people thinking it's funny when women abuse. Like, so a lot of the slipper beating videos that I have seen on Twitter, I mean, some of them are forwarded around by MRAs going, this is what men deal with in India. But I'm also seeing a lot of them where people they think it's funny, right? This woman gets out of paying her taxi bill by beating the hell out of a taxi with her slipper. And he can't do anything because if he lays a finger on her, India is so gynocentric and their law is so gynocentric. He's screwed, especially if she's a higher caste than he is. And it happens that way a lot, right? And they think it's funny. And yeah, you see it all the time in anime. You see it all the time in animated shows in general. cartoons, in cartoons for kids and cartoons for adults. It's treated like it's funny when women's anger explodes into violence against the people around them, because of the myth that women are inept at violence. And, we can be, in comparison to people who are bigger, stronger, smarter, faster, have more endurance, have more athletic agility. Not necessarily like the bendy gymnastic agility, but the agility to punch faster and move their arms faster. Like that makes a difference, right? But it doesn't mean that even if somebody can hit you harder, even if somebody can break your bones when they hit, it doesn't mean that when you punch, you don't do any harm. It doesn't mean that it's safe to just let a woman throw a temper tantrum in public. And it certainly doesn't mean that there's never any danger from female violence, because when a woman discovers that her punches are inept, she grabs a pot of boiling water, or an iron skillet, or a knife, or a gun, or a bottle of poison, or she launches her boyfriend at you, her brother, her dad, her son, her neighbor, the nearest guy. Like, you get into a conflict with a woman in public and she starts hitting you. If you defend yourself, that's all it takes to set off the nearest white knight, and suddenly you're getting hit by two people, and one of them is not inept at beating you up, for sure, whether the other one is or not. Like, that's insane.
There's the movie trope of the housewife with her hair in curlers, and she's in a nightgown, and she's brandishing a rolling pin, and in this movie context, she's like the final boss of the hood.
Yeah,
like no one could fuck with your mama in with her hair and rollers and a nightgown and a rolling pin. She will tear her way through the city, destroying everyone in her path. In reality, that's not the case. She'll come across the first thug she sees and she'll get raped. But the reason it's a trope in movies is because people have been scared of that image ever since the youngest of ages, because that has been the image that has terrorized them the most since they were children.
Well, in the hands of an angry woman, a rolling pin is a club.
Yeah, anything heavy enough is a murder weapon. Yep. Almost anything is a murder weapon, especially in the hands of a woman who will not be held accountable for using it.
Like, the one I used when I was a kid to make cookies and stuff was half the size of a baseball bat. So...
And yeah, it goes to show you that the images that strike terror into people are so very often not the images that do the most physical damage, but do the most psychological damage. And that includes the image of whatever we saw our mothers as when we were very little children and have barely any memory left over of it. Because despite the stereotype that the man is the one who does the spanking, in the modern age, in the last few generations, it's very much been the woman. And so we have this image of women doing us damage where we can't do any back, and we can't do anything about it. And so we have these tropes of these women who seem domestically very powerful, and that somehow translates into being a Mary Sue, albeit a very bad-tempered Mary Sue. And people don't put two and two together in either direction. This sort of female physical dominance is seen as a joke. And it's because it doesn't affect adults, but it does affect children. And it sort of, like I say, we don't put two and two together, that the violence that children experience becomes the violence that adults experience. But somewhere in that process, it goes from women are the ones who actually put this motion in place to never mind men are the ones who actually perpetuate violence, because they're the ones who pick it up from their mothers and pass it on to someone else, and that's all we see. Because I don't know, because the movies we make feature women as the people who do righteous violence and the men who do unrighteous violence.
Yeah.
And it all gets sewn together.
Women are the moral measuring stick.
Yeah.
And if they don't feel like you've measured up, they will hit you with that too. I don't know if you've ever been hit with a yardstick. We used to battle each other in my neighborhood with all kinds of things. And one time we decided to sword fight with yardsticks. That was not a good idea. You get covered in welts. It's worse than willow tree branch fights, which we also did, but you did that in long pants and long sleeve shirts, and we didn't think about that with the yardsticks. We just didn't think they would hurt as bad as dowel rods. So
sword fighting is a silly idea, even with rubber sticks, even with cushions, because even cushions have like zippers in them, and you might get caught in the eye with a zipper. And that'll do you some damage. Just wrestle, folks.
Now I have to get you into the Ohio Renaissance Fair, because there's a company that sells these neat toys. They don't have zippers. They don't have anything on them that'll do any damage to you, and you can beat the hell out of each other with them, and it's fun. And they're great toys for kids, because they do kids like to pretend sword fight. And they're not allowed to pretend to play with guns anymore, so that's all they've got left. And these things, they actually look like it's almost like somebody stuck the last quarter inch of a paper towel roll on the end of a stick, but it's fabric and padding. And so you can actually do that. That's not what we did, though. When I was a kid, we used towels wrapped around dowel rods, or we tried the yardstick thing. That didn't work out so well. And then we did we would take willow branches when the leaves would fall, and then they had these long whip-like branches that would fall off after the leaves fell, and those were quite if you got hit on bare skin with that, it would cut you. It didn't just raise a welt, it would cut you. So you had to be skilled with it. We got in trouble for that one too. And BB gun fights. We had BB gun fights until one of the guys over-pumped the BB gun and shot one of the gals in the butt because she had decided to do the BB gun fight with shorts on, and it embedded into her flesh, and her father took away the BB guns and redistributed them to the parents as desired. But yeah, we had an interesting time in the neighborhood growing up when I was a kid. But as I
was about to say, play needn't involve weapons at all. This is why boys like wrestling so much.
Yeah,
because there's no law in the land that can take away weapons so as to prevent boys from wrestling each other. All you need is a soft surface, and I guess you could take away our soft surfaces from us if you want, just like you can take away our fucking flak jackets.
No, you know what women today do? They punish them for fighting. No, we weren't fighting. We were just wrestling. We were just roughhousing. What's that? They don't understand.
That's where it all begins. We like to blame the government for taking away all our weapons, but it really starts with disgruntled mothers who have no idea how to take the fun away from their sons and their husbands, other than by using the government to do it for them.
Yep, it's sad.
Boys and men will always find ways to amuse themselves with competition and with physical roughhousing, and women will always find a way to get ahead of them in the arms race. Sooner or later, they'll make it illegal for boys to wrestle each other. I don't know how, but they will. Oh God, I just predicted the future again. I'm sorry.
Don't worry, because they're already kind of doing that. Olympic wrestling has been under attack at the university level for, something like 20 years now, under Title IX. So It's kind of already happening. But in any case, yeah, women will take anything that they have at hand to beat you with it, whether it's an inanimate object or information or the government or whatever. And that's another thing, honestly, that makes it dishonest to say that women don't have control over like the finances of their home at all. For instance, they look at who earns the most money in various countries and who has bank accounts in various countries, but do they consider, on whose behalf money is being spent? Under guardianship, for instance, in Middle Eastern countries, women may not, just independently go get a job. But part of the reason is because they don't have to pay taxes on their income. Their husband does. So he has to give his permission for her to get a job, because if she gets a job that makes a significant amount of money and then refuses to allow taxes to be taken out of that money and spends it all on herself, because she's not required to spend it on her family, she can spend it on herself, then he's stuck trying to pay taxes on income that he has no control over. And so that's one thing. She may not have a lot of control over his income, but if he doesn't spend his income ensuring her economic welfare, that she has a place to live, that she has sufficient clothing, and that she has sufficient food and so on, if he is starving her, if he is, keeping her in an unsafe or unsuitable place, if she's unable to comply with religious law because he doesn't pay for the things that she needs to do that, he gets in trouble. Right? He's the one in violation of the law. And so that is a woman having control over income as well, just by virtue of being the requirement. Right? There is no such requirement on women's income where she has to spend a portion of it ensuring her husband's economic welfare, because she's the person being provided for. It's not her responsibility to be the provider. Like in the United States, that's an unfamiliar thing for a lot of women. And so they see these women as captive. And a lot of women are in countries with guardianship are deciding that as well. They don't like the situation and they want to change it. And they're playing victim of it without considering the impact that it has also on the men around them. And when we hear about it, and we hear about how bad it is for women and how it isn't bad at all for men, they'll talk about, this oil baron or, that sheik, but they don't necessarily talk about the lower income brackets of men, right? The majority of the population who doesn't necessarily have a very high income, and women can take them to court, to family court, for failure to support or failure to treat her right, when their income doesn't give them the capability, and their position in society or their education or their capabilities don't allow them to increase it. And so that's something that doesn't get taken into consideration by feminists when they talk about this. There's different ways to have control over something. There's having it in your hands and being able to use it as a tool yourself. And then there's also being the beneficiary of mandatory use on your behalf by another person. And where your satisfaction with how that other person uses that tool on your behalf is a contributing factor to whether or not they get in trouble for how they do that. And in a lot of places where we're told women don't have control over any income, that is the case. Now I don't have data on sub-Saharan Africa, But I would bet that the reason that banking isn't universal there is because, first of all, income is probably not supportive of universal banking. There's probably more indie farming, and there's probably more poverty. And then, it's like you can't, bank accounts are not allowed to be empty, right? So if you have no dollars or whatever currency your nation has, you have zero currency, you're not going to need a bank account to hold it. You're not going to need a bank account to help you spend it. And if all of your purchases are made in your community and you're not trading currency but labor or goods, I went out and hunted this animal and now I have a skin. I would like to trade this skin for these items. You can't deposit animal skins in the bank either, right? Or your labor, right? You can't trade favors with your neighbor through the bank. So that's why. And women do that more than men. Men have steady jobs because they have to support a household. But the barter economy among women, even in the United States, is alive and kicking, right? One of my few like designer type articles of clothing when I was growing up was a dress that my mom wanted me to have for some high school dance. I think it might have been a homecoming or one of the more formal dances that I wasn't sure I wanted to go to. But when it was decided that I was going, she got a pattern and she got fabric and she was going to make the dress. Well, then I had a classmate who his mom wanted family portraits, but she didn't have money to pay for the family portrait. But she was as much of a seamstress, as good of a seamstress as my mom. So they traded. Mom did photography for her, and she made the dress. And it was a fairly even trade because that tailoring, work as a seamstress is actually highly skilled work, and so is portrait photography, and that was the trade. We do that a lot. I traded childcare with my friends. We didn't do getting involved with organizations that provide childcare because you can't trust them, right? We've traded assistance moving. We've traded working on, like my husband has worked on other people's cars. I've helped other people with housework and kitchen work and stuff. And we've also had help with, like if our cars are out of commission all at once for some reason, which right now that's 3 out of 4. One of them we're trying to get rid of because it's dead. But that has been, I've always been able to count on a ride from somebody. We trade. We don't necessarily, well, how do you count that in this this idea of control over spending, right? Do I submit data on other people's use of their fuel in their car for my benefit in response to I babysat their kid 5 years ago? And like that's not something that you measure very easily. It takes a lot more work to look into that and accurately describe that than it does to say, well, more women work part-time and more men work full-time, so they don't have control over money. Because it's bull. And in countries where there is a welfare system, whatever it's called in different countries, that's another one that they're not going to count. If he has to have a full-time job to pay for his groceries, but because she has 2 children, she gets food stamps and doesn't necessarily have to worry about them getting taken away from her anytime soon. And, if he has to pay his doctor bills with money, but she has Medicaid, if he has, his full rent to pay, but she lives in Section 8 housing or gets rent assistance, and then she has control over as much and sometimes more money than he does. But it's taxpayer dollars, and it doesn't count in these studies. They don't look into that. So it looks like he has control over a lot of money and she has control over none, when actually she has an income that's equivalent to a full-time job plus.
That's so fucked up, because if you did factor that in, I'm sure that women would come out ahead.
Oh yeah. It depending on depending on how many kids you have in your home that you're supporting and what size of living space you qualify for because of that, and how much you qualify for in financial assistance, in food stamp assistance, in medical care assistance, and so on. Because if you're on Medicaid and you go to the doctor and Medicaid doesn't cover the full doctor bill, the doctor cannot charge the patient more money on top of what Medicaid pays them. They have to take what Medicaid pays and leave it at that. So if you have a kid that, and this is in urban areas, and in particular in impoverished neighborhoods that are maybe right up against industrial areas where the air quality is lower than it is out in the suburbs, just slightly. You have more asthma, you have more allergies, you have other health problems that may be related to diet or poor living conditions. You may live in a building that has a mold problem that's being hidden from you, or that you just don't know you can do anything about it. There may be all kinds of... There's also more abuse and neglect in those neighborhoods and everything, right? So, you may see women spending tens of thousands of dollars in medical care that they don't have to pay for, but their kid goes to the hospital on a regular basis with an asthma attack or a diabetic emergency or injuries or as a result of violence in their neighborhood. And none of that gets counted in these studies. Right? If she doesn't have to pay a $50,000 hospital bill after surgeons had to remove a bullet from her son's shoulder because you paid for it, that doesn't count in these studies. So the guy down the street that has to pay all of his own medical bills and can't afford to go to the doctor, but has more documented money going through his hands that he earned, he looks like he has control over more income, but maybe he only has control over $30,000 a year, and maybe she has control over more like $100,000 a year, and half of it is medical bills, and the rest of it is mostly entitlement programs, right? And it's not that she sees herself living high on the hog, right? She's in a bad neighborhood. She's in housing that has drug users in it, maybe has to step over addicts in the street on her way to take her kid to the doctor. So it's not like she's living necessarily well, but it's costing her, or it's costing you, as much as if she was. And feminists will tell you this woman has control over no income, when actually she has control over quite a bit. It's just that her circumstances, by choice, have caused her use of it to be very ineffective in improving her quality of life. So he says, significant portions of women have limited influence over major household spending decisions. But he's limiting influence to authority, right? where if she's the moral measuring stick for how that money is spent, he's not counting that. And he says, in developing countries, only 59% of women have a bank account compared to 67% of men. Well, if it's the man who is responsible for paying rent, mortgage, or outright buying a home, paying for transportation, things that you can't barter for but have to pay for with money, and it's the man who's responsible for funding all of the household expenses, then he's more likely to need a bank account and use one. So there you go. And then he says, in sub-Saharan Africa, the number of women with an account is less than 30%. But again, I question the validity of that argument, because again, is this a mostly barter economy? And he didn't actually say how many men have bank accounts there either, I noticed. But is this a mostly barter economy? Is this an economy where in a marriage, a male is obligated, the husband is obligated by law to take care of his wife, or by social agreement, by cultural standards, and if he doesn't, he gets punished? Is she his moral measuring stick? Because if that's the case, then it's a lie to say that she has no control over their income. So that's that section. Let's see where we are. Paternity fraud is short, so we're going to get into it. And this is interesting, right? Because he just states this outright. Fact! Levels of paternity fraud are very low. MRAs claim that there are high levels of paternity fraud.
Is that why there's a 33% chance that the child that you think is yours is not yours?
Yeah, I was going to say the genetic, not research, but your family history seeking companies, right? Genetic testing companies that find out who your relatives are proving to actually create havoc in a lot of households because of that. But yeah, fact! Levels of paternity fraud are very low. And then he goes on to say that MRAs claim there are high levels of paternity fraud in which women lie about who the father of their child is. The actual evidence of misattributed paternity shows that the actual rate is around 1%, despite the widespread myth that 10 to 30% of births involve a father other than the identified one. But what is he citing? A study from 2005, or at least writing from 2005, and that is before it was common for people to just go get a paternity test or a DNA test about their family history and so on. And there's more and more stories coming out of young people that have looked into their ancestry, or dads that have gotten, their kids' Ancestry.com or 23andMe or other organizations looking into their family history and getting a DNA test as part of that, and come to find out he's not the father. So 2005, that is outdated. Usually I don't call research outdated as my main argument, but because that significant change in how we find things out has happened, that's outdated. Very outdated. And the other thing is, there are other issues. We don't just say that there are high levels of paternity fraud. And frankly, in my opinion, 1% is a high level. That's too many. If 1 in 100 men have to be worried that the woman who told them they are the father lied, that's a lot. Because you look at how many births there are just in the United States every year, and our birth rate's not particularly high, right? It's really that's a lot of families where a guy has been told he's the father of a child and he supported that child, and then it turns out that no, he's not, you know. And it does wreak havoc. And the other thing is, you have the issue of women naming a father in order to get child support, or in order to qualify for social welfare programs, because, you know, this is one that Republicans take the blame for this squarely. It didn't used to be that in order for a woman who is a single mom to receive public assistance, she had to name the father of the child. Well, now that she does, and it's so that the state can go after him for child support. And it's on the premise that doing so recovers expenses. But the amount that the country spends collecting that child support is ridiculously high in comparison to what is collected. And so it's very deceptive to say that it recovers expenses, because you're actually paying people an annual salary and benefits to do that. They have to be in a building. The building has to have utilities, and it has to be maintained. It has to be cleaned. So on top of the expenses related directly, you also have the expenses of maintaining the system. And then if the collection has to be done through force or coercion, you have the court system getting involved, and that there are expenses there. And then you also have the banking system getting involved, you know, if there's bank accounts, or the wage garnishment system. So you have an employer who is also having to pay their accountant to deal with wage garnishment. So it's definitely not honest to pretend that collection of child support offsets welfare. It doesn't necessarily pay for itself. But now, because of that, there are women who lie about who the father is, because if they don't, they can't get their welfare checks. They can't get their food stamps. They can't get their housing paid for. You know, and rather than go out and get a job, or maybe not make babies with men they're not going to marry and create a household with to raise the children together as part of an intact family, they lie, and it's getting discovered more and more. But the other thing is, our biggest argument about paternity fraud is that it is reprehensible and tolerated in society. It doesn't have to be common. If 1 in 100 men, that 1 in 100 fathers is actually not the father, and they find out they're not the father, it doesn't stop the child from the government from going after them for child support. Right? If they find out they're not the father in a marriage and there is a divorce because of it, the state may still impose child support because they acted as the father. Right? Nobody considers when a woman lies and says that her husband, or the boyfriend with the most money, is the father of her baby, that she is denying the child an opportunity to have a relationship with his real father, and the real father an opportunity to have a relationship with his child. Right? That the trauma isn't just, it's to the man who is lied to. Right? And there's a grieving process. I've seen men go through this process. They find out their child, who they love, is not their child. And they go it's like they lost a kid. It's like their kid died. It hurts. And yet feminists want to treat it as if it's not a big deal. Right? It is one of the most abusive things that you can do. One of the most psychologically abusive things that you can do. You take away somebody's whole identity that way. A kid loses their entire family. If your dad isn't your dad's parents are not your grandparents, your dad's siblings are not your aunts and uncles, their children are not your cousins. Right? Your whole one side of your whole family just suddenly is no longer your family. Not biologically, anyway. They might still love you, you might still love them, but there's now a rift or a wall. And then on top of that, if you're 10 years old when you find out, you missed out on 10 years with your real dad. You'd missed out on 10 years knowing who your real dad is. Or you find out that your real dad is a loser, or an asshole, or dead, or, your mom doesn't know who he is. Right? So you don't get that relationship, and you didn't get a chance to find out. And that's if you find out when you're a kid. If you're 20 years old when you find out, you spent your whole childhood not knowing your real dad, not knowing your real grandparents, not knowing your real aunts and uncles, not knowing your real cousins. And your siblings are now only your half-siblings, and it's kind of weird. The situation becomes weird. It's not weird if you grow up that way and you know. But it's weird if it changes suddenly. So it's a massive trauma to inflict on your family. It's not a little white lie. It's not protecting family harmony like the French government says in their choice to outlaw just getting a paternity test and finding out. But not a big deal, right? Not a big deal at all. That's the feminist outlook. It only happens to a few men. It's not a big deal. Like cannibal serial killers are also kind of rare in comparison to the overall size of the population, but we're still horrified by what they do. I can't understand why people aren't horrified by this. I would be, if that happened to me, I would be heartbroken and angry. The grieving process would happen. The anger cycle would happen. I might even want to take legal action. It just, I cannot imagine. And you would never trust your mother again, either. So that's another loss. But I don't know if anything I didn't cover on that, guys.
I think we're good. I think we can speed on.
Yeah.
Hopefully towards the end of ever talking about Michael Flood again.
I'm not 100% sure I want to get into the women and children first thing, because there's research that he cited that I actually want to open and look at when we go over that. I read ahead on this, and I will say this for a preview for next week. His claim is that we, as a movement, claim that the chivalric notion of women and children first rules in shipping disasters, such that women are prioritized over men, right? That's not entirely the claim. We have used the Titanic as an example, but it's not just that women and children are put first, right? It's that when an order like that goes out, it doesn't take into consideration the value of men to their families and so on. So it should never happen. It should never be women and children first, right? Especially like in our household when my kids were little, when our kids were little, if we had to make a decision like that, I actually had nightmares about that, where we would be in a situation where definitely, no matter what we did, one of us was going to die. And I went through the logic of it. If my husband died, my son would have lost contact with his sisters. They would have lost contact with their brother. His ex-wife would not have allowed them to see each other. And the obvious solution would have been that I would have had to make the sacrifice, because it would have been the only way that the family had any opportunity of staying together. And so if they forced me onto a lifeboat and him to go down with a ship, the kids would have suffered because of that in ways that would have been unanticipated by the women and children first mantra shouting people. And there is a social attitude, and it is condemned. Like, when it's not women and children first, men are treated like cowards. But when it is women and children first, women don't get treated like cowards. So it's a much more complicated issue than he's making it. But next week we'll look at this where he says research on a large sample of ship disasters finds that the survival rate of women is only half that of men. There's some chicanery going on with that claim. So we'll look at that next week, and that's where we'll start. And then after that, of course, we have women and men's homicides against children, and women and men's homicides against intimate partners. And his data is only going to come from Australia. I think that's where he might be. So that's why. But yeah. Tyler Preston, you're right. The author is full of shit. We understand that clearly. So,
he's more shit than man. That's why we call him Plug.
Yep. Or I like the nickname Michael Fraud, honestly, because a lot of this is quite dishonest. But so I don't think we actually got any super chats. I didn't see any super chats. So let me look at the chat in. Okay, so we don't have. I don't see any Rumble rants that are paid. I'm going to read. We got one super chow. Richard Bier gave us $5 and said, "Remember when the television stations used to turn off after a certain hour? Usually the sign-off included the national anthem." And yes, I do remember that. And it's funny too because it was actually featured in movies as a way to tell what time the television would go off. There were a couple of things that happened with television and in the United States that you would see portrayed in movies that people would know what time it was in the movie based on what was on the television. For instance, if you saw a news broadcast and it was maybe twilight or close to twilight, you would know it was around 6 o'clock, right? Because there was the 6 o'clock news. And the news wasn't on all day. There were not channels that broadcast news all day until I was in, I want to say, high school. And that was a paid channel. I think C-SPAN was a paid channel, like over and above your basic cable program. And then if you saw, the "Do you know where your children are" announcement, it would start with this really broadcast. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? And my parents always thought they knew where we were, but quite frequently when they thought we were in bed, I was hiding behind one of their chairs watching the television. So I actually saw that commercial and had to stifle giggles because they thought I was in bed and I was in the living room. But it was really about parents not having a track of whether their children are at home or not by 10 o'clock at night, right? And then I want to say it was 11 o'clock, not midnight, when the television stations would go off the air, and they would play a series of images, and the national anthem would be broadcast with it. And then at the end, I think it ended with the flag raising at Iwo Jima. And so it was kind of a weird thing. And then it would go to static. And if you went to, like, if you stayed at a hotel, you could count on using the television, the static from the television, as your white noise, so that you could sleep, because it would sound as close to your box fan or your air conditioner at home that was your white noise, and it would block out noise from other hotel rooms unless it was really loud. Right. So yeah, I remember all of that. I'm old.
Yeah, I remember reading TV guides from the 80s.
Yeah.
And every night in the middle of the night, there would be this show on TV called Close. And I used to wonder, what is this TV show called Close? Why is it on so late at night? And why is it on every single night? What do they talk about on Close? And it turns out, no, that was just the indication of when the programming closed.
Yes, because close and close are spelled the same.
It was closed. And it turns out that's all it was. And it was just this, test card, much like that one we have now with the colors and stuff. And it was this weird picture with this girl and a clown and a chalkboard playing noughts and crosses, playing tic-tac-toe, as you'll call it. And now I find myself longing for the days when there was a close, because there is no close anymore.
Yeah.
They just pump shit into your house 24 hours a day. And now I long for the day when the TV guide reads nothing but close.
Yeah.
I mean, close. It opens, I don't know, midday that day, and then it just closes. I.e., there is no TV anymore, and we can all go back to loving each other and trusting each other because we're not being poisoned by these bastards.
Well, I miss when television had stuff like Captain Kangaroo, and not.
Yeah, we got the internet for that.
That's all
we
gone.
got the internet for all that shit now. We can have Saturday morning cartoons any day we like.
Yeah, I know. I miss the novelty though of having a television reason to get up early on Saturday, even if the weather was too bad to go outside and play. And I remember before it was common to have a device so that you could record stuff and watch it later. So if you wanted to see it, you watched it when it broadcast. And so you got up early in the morning, you watched your Saturday morning cartoons, you had your breakfast cereal in front of the TV, and watched commercials for your favorite cereal, and were like, I'm eating that right now, and it's yummy, and then you went outside and played until you were so tired that you had to come in and have lunch or supper, or mom called you for food. But yeah, all of that's changed, and now we're fighting over whether or not boys are boys and girls are girls most of the time, and whether or not it's okay for teachers to molest them. Totally, like I said, this country is not the country I grew up in at all.
In many ways, the good old days were actually not just old, but good.
Yeah. When I was in high school, there was a fire in one of the homes in a neighborhood across town. And there was a boy in my class that he had no popularity. He was quiet and shy, not nerdy as in like the movie nerds. Like there were a lot of us that were kind of like that, but he was just invisible. A lot of guys that are not necessarily high in popularity are just invisible, right? So this fire happens, and it happens at a time when either the parents weren't home or somebody was asleep, so it got out of control before they started getting out of the house. And there were kids in the house that couldn't figure out how to get out. And he went in and got each one of them out one at a time. And I think we talked about that, and he was referred to as a hero by the rest of our class for the whole rest of the school year that year. It changed his social status. And today, that'd be a blip on people's radar. They wouldn't talk about that. They'd talk about something else, how the fire started. If the parents weren't home, it would be, a crime against humanity. Like back in the 70s and 80s, you could be not home for half an hour. You could walk to the grocery store, buy a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread, walk back, and your kids would normally be fine. and it would not be something where you would expect something like that to happen. And today, even if I don't know, even if they did acknowledge what he did, they might demonize him for other reasons. Oh, what were his real motives, or he broke into those people's house. He's not a fireman. That's not his job. What's he doing? Toxic masculinity. There would be no, this guy did something great, good on him. It would be, he's abnormal. Guys don't usually do great things like this. Or, the parents, where were the parents, and they'd be demonized and we wouldn't hear anything. That's a big change that's taken place. I remember when I was growing up, men, at least their actions were recognized. They were not invisible when they did something, big and heroic, even if they were invisible because they were quiet most of the time. And that change is really sad to me, because it takes away from people should feel good about having done something great. They don't have to need to be worshipped for it, but there should be happiness that comes from knowing that people benefited from your actions, and being reminded that people benefited from your actions in a big way by other people is part of bringing about that happiness. And it's very sad to me that changed. And we used to see news and movies and television shows about that type of heroics, like that every day. X is happening, nobody else is here to do anything about it, I'd better take care of it, being just a common thing among men. And it's becoming a rarity for people to even admit that men do that. We're not allowed to notice that anymore. And in fact, men are being treated like they've done something wrong for it. And I think people are really going to regret that in a few years. But in any case, like I said, we'll start with women and children first. Paternity fraud is the whole thing that he said about paternity fraud ended up being absolute bullshit. The only other thing I will say about that is I would caution, if you're not suspicious of paternity fraud, like, don't go out getting 23andMe and other things like that willy-nilly, because the cops are using that to find suspects, and they are falsely accusing people more often than they are identifying perpetrators. If your DNA is similar enough to the perpetrator, and there's been instances where the match has been an infant, right? And they go looking and they find out, oh no, it's an infant. Well, then they, of course, are going to look at the rest of the family. But if the match is the same familial relationship that infant was in that case, but the individual is 20, then they might just say, well, we've got our guy, even if it's not true. So you have to be really careful with that. If you do have suspicion, it's better to at least go through a medical facility, because there's one additional hurdle between that and the cops, and that's HIPAA. It doesn't stop them entirely, but it does make it less likely. They can't just dragnet medical DNA testing, but they sort of do, and they do it sort of unethically and illegally with publicly available consumer DNA testing. And we have not, our country hasn't done anything in the United States. There's other countries too where this has happened, and nothing's been done to protect the privacy of citizens and to protect citizens against being falsely accused because their DNA is almost but not quite a match, or is a match but they're not the perpetrator. So I guess that's my PSA for the night. And And with that, I will thank everybody for listening. I don't like making this a really long show because this is not tolerable, right? Going through this crap. So, thanks for listening to the Rancid Sausage. Thanks to my two co-hosts for sticking out the Rancid Sausage. And thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. Good night, all.
Rancid but short. Good night.
Good night.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.